Secreted Man here. So, From the Grave to the Flame Ministry has made another video trying to shoulder the burden of proof, which is really good, and explain why there must be or is a God. The first statement he made in this particular video, I'm going to make another video going into more detail about it. But in this video, I'm going to have a kind of casual conversation with my brother who does believe in God, and particular Christian God. We might get into more details about that as we go on. But the statement that From the Grave made in this video, the first statement was, there must be a God because there must be a first cause. And so we're going to talk about that. Now, I'm not going to show him on camera because when he ever gets around to YouTube, he'll only be in avatar format. That's his choice. I'm going to respect that. So you'll hear his voice, and that will be it. So Disembodied Voice Man is what I'm going to call him, because he doesn't really had decided on a final avatar name yet. Okay, so let's start with the statement, there must be a first cause. And I know there's some logical errors and problems with this. So let's start there. There must be a first cause. I'm assuming the conclusion. I'm assuming the conclusion.
Fallacy right away.
Okay, well, how's that? Because I had a cause of some sort, so I had a first cause, didn't I? Or is that also fallacious?
To one degree, we had a cause, but not really. Yes, a sperm met with an egg, and that caused the zygote to form, and then we came to be. But in reality, the energy that the subatomic particles and atoms and whatever that the sperm and egg were made out of existed before they existed in that form. They have always existed since the beginning, if there ever was such a thing, because matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. Right,
and that's kind of another problem with this argument is it's saying things come into being, and that's kind of the wrong. That's in natural language you can get away with that, but we're in logic now. We're trying to drive for precision. So I didn't come into being. As that I am has come from things that existed before. So it's like, okay, the way I appear today will be different tomorrow, but the tomorrow me doesn't just come into being. It's cells and things that are, replicating and whatnot, and those are because of energy, and you could go break it down, but you couldn't say at any point that something new. At no point does anything new really just poof into existence. So I have a problem with the come into being. I'm not sure what words we could use for that.
Well, there's kind of a question, and the scientific answer is we don't know.
Right.
The philosophical answer is God. So
at least if you're a theist.
If you go back, at least if you're a theist, if you go back to the improperly named Big Bang, the Big Expansion.
Yeah, the Big Expansion, right.
Okay, you have this energy state that at some point in time goes from what it was and then it starts expanding. Before it started expanding, we don't know what it was, how it was, what it did, or even if it existed at all. Did it always exist, or did it start to exist? Now, if it started to exist and did not exist before that, then the universe, the visible, explainable, knowable universe, began. It came to be.
Right.
If that's the case.
Maybe.
But we don't know
right.
that that's the case, because we can't look back beyond that point.
So I think it's point T1 or whatever the Planck time is. And by look, we mean using mathematics. We're not actually looking at anything. At the best I think we have is some background radiation. But then you get into all this complex science that leaves logic far behind it, because there's two problems. First, logic, as we're talking about, the different fallacies, the different premises, the law of identity. A is A, for example. Well, that's great, and that works today, and it worked yesterday and the day before, but if you keep going all the way back to before, say, gravity was a thing, then you start to have questions about whether or not these laws of logic, I prefer calling them rules because they're but whatever, the description of how we understand the universe has to change when the universe itself is different. So if we imagined a totally different universe where, say, perpetual motion existed, well, I don't know if the rules of logic would be different or not, but they might very well be. Or say, let's say maybe a better example would be if every Friday randomly somebody turned into a fish, and we never knew who it was going to be or when, so we'd have to have constructed our society to be ready for this. But then they would, after Friday was over, they would turn back into a human. So so everybody carry around your bowl with you of water just in case you turn into a fish, on Friday. But okay, so the law of identity wouldn't really apply, but it kind of would. So it'd be a very different logical system. So when we go back in time to the very start of the big expansion, the rules of logic don't apply anymore, because a different logic would have to apply.
The idea is that at that T1, that first moment that we can compute with our math and our science to the best of our knowledge at this point, that it started the process, that something had to cause it to start, therefore God the first cause. But the problem is that when there are no rules,
then there's no rules, right? Because
so at that point, if nothing existed, a literal nothing, which we've never seen.
We couldn't see. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
But if a literal, actual nothing existed, then there are no rules.
There's absolutely no rules to prevent anything from
just popping in on its own.
Right.
So to say that God had to be the first cause, well, we don't know that there was a first cause.
Right, and again, we don't
know that there was a cause.
You're using this modal logic of deductive reasoning. Essentially, you're saying, okay, well, look, before I was me as an adult, I was a teenager. Before that, I was a kid. Before that, I was a baby. Before that, and that's great, and that works all the way back until you get to the very beginnings of the universe, the very early time, and it's like, well, these things didn't begin anymore, and they just are at this point, and rules break down, and we stop being able to speak about it. And so since we can't say, well, deductive reasoning still has to work in this zone, well, we don't know that. We don't know what that zone's like, so we can't apply our logic to that time. And you could say, well, that's where God exists, in the illogical, and be like, okay, great, but why substitute an idea where a question mark suffices, right? Because instead of saying, well, I don't know, we're just going to say, well, it's God, or it's magic, or it's a wizard, or, you could put anything there, and just because it seems to answer one question, it actually brings more questions to the table. But it's not a good argument, because, well, of all the things we've said so far.
There's another problem with it. It ignores the possibility that there was no beginning, that there was no first event, that the universe is an infinite thing, that the universe is born, lives, dies, born, lives, dies, or infinity.
Or some other
or
some other thing that we haven't even considered.
That is one of the prevailing hypotheses. We have absolutely no way to test it. It's not possible to test.
Yeah. Well,
but there's some mathematics that does support the idea. A lot of mathematics that supports it. But if that is the case, and we just have one universe following the other, then there was no first event at all.
Right, and that's the other thing. So
it ignores that possibility. Which, if that's what it is, then
if that's how it is. And we just don't know. And the other half of that is, well, but a true infinite is impossible because of reasons.
Yeah,
and
there might be a true infinite. Now, we just wouldn't know what it was.
Now, as a theist, I believe that you would have an objection to the statement that a true infinity cannot exist.
I would say slightly differently. I don't believe that a infinite natural object can exist. So in other words, a planet that's infinitely large cannot exist. A galaxy, a universe that is infinitely large cannot exist. It has to be finite. But
or at least finite in one direction.
No, I mean finite in total.
In total, okay. Because I was going to say, do we want to make
a boundary at some point?
Okay. Did we want to make a difference between infinity and eternity? That infinity has a start and no end. Eternity is a true infinite. So rather than saying true infinite and then infinite, we'll say eternity and infinity or something like that.
A physical object.
Okay. A natural object couldn't be infinite.
Right.
As far as we know. As far as we know. I mean, I don't.
If there is such a thing as a supernatural, then it could be infinite because, again, the rules don't apply. The rules on the universe are pretty well set as far as I can see, and if we did encounter an infinite something, we would never be able to know that it was infinite.
Right. We could say it was infinite, or we could say, well, it's nearly infinite. But just somebody comes along and be like, well, no, it stopped right after you stopped looking for the end, or whatever. So yeah, if we encountered a true infinite, we would never know if it was a true infinite.
But I think that it is possible that a true infinite thing can exist, but would be beyond our current ability to understand.
Right, well, because, God is conceived as being infinite or eternal, but it's the same, we're talking the same thing, because infinity, or true infinity, I should say, where there's no start, no end, that is eternity, so...
Right, but it's also pretty much the definition of the Christian God. Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. No beginning, no ending.
Right, so if you can't have a true infinite, which is equivalent to saying you can't have eternalness, then you can't have that sort of God, right?
Right.
So there must be then a theological objection to the sort of statement that, oh, well, the universe has to have a cause, and that cause, because of the idea that there can't be a true infinite, well, wait a minute, then our kind of God that we wanted to argue for can't exist. So you can't have it both ways.
Right. But then you end up with some kind of some form of special pleading, unless you define the differences between natural and supernatural.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms.
a natural infinite can't exist, but a supernatural infinite can, for reasons.
Whatever reason, right.
But if that's the case, then fine. We can say a natural infinite can't exist, but our infinite God can. Okay, well, that's fine. But if that's your argument, how do you show that?
You'd still have to change, and you'd still have to change it, and you still wouldn't be able to rely on deductive reasoning to say, well, it has to be a first cause, because it can't be a true infinity, except for when it's a true infinity that's our God. So it's just, it wouldn't work anymore.
It works if God is a different kind of thing. In other words, if supernatural is a thing, then it's a different kind of thing. And it doesn't follow the normal rules that we're used to. If that is...
So, I mean, you're looking at a hypothetical syllogism rather than a straight modus ponens or modus tenens that would be, you know, if A then B, if B then C, A therefore C.
It has to be.
It would have to be a hypothetical because there, you couldn't know. You could say, oh, I believe that these attributes about this particular God are true. And that, okay, a belief statement, you know, I can't do anything with that because it's a belief statement. And if that happens to be the case, then this and this and this are true. Kind of on a small tangent, there was a challenge I never got around to addressing for the atheist to make an argument for God. And the argument I came up with is that, you know, I'll go with the biblical God for now, why not? And say, well, it says that, you know, that you can't see God and you can't test God, and the sort of faith that God wants is this just essentially blind faith. So if that God is real, then there's no evidence of God. There is no evidence of God, therefore that God is real. So there you go.
The problem with that is a circular argument.
Well, no, but it's not. If the God, as stated, wanted to have no evidence of it, then there would be no evidence of it. There's no evidence of it, therefore that God exists.
Yeah, but there's something faulty in there.
Oh, there's some problems. Well, I'll leave it up to my audience to solve that in the comments. But it is a small tangent. But as far as this argument goes, there's too many wording changes at the very least, because as you suggested, you would have to have a separate class of supernatural infinities or eternities, however you wanted to name it. You'd have to then have arguments that for those things, because you couldn't just say that they have to exist. You have to demonstrate within logic why they're something to investigate. And you can't use deductive reasoning because deductive reasoning breaks down, at least on the natural universal level, so you'd have to use some other sort of argumentation, and the best I think you could come up with would be a hypothetical syllogism, which this argument is never presented as.
Yeah, it's just presented as an outright statement of fact, but the statement isn't borne out by the rest of the argument because it can't be.
Right, there's too many exceptions to it. It's like, well,
I can essentially start off with my conclusion and try to make that my argument, and it's bordering on the level of a formal fallacy of failure to make an argumentation. I mean, it's just borderline of that, and you know, I mean, yeah, he's got an interesting idea, but he's way off on the wrong track.
No, I mean, it's an idea that's been around a while.
Yeah, but even theologically speaking, he's off on the wrong track.
Right, because you have to start doing special pleading or something, right?
I am a Christian. One of the elements of being a Christian is believing in an infinite, eternal God.
Right.
So
you can't have it both ways, right? So yeah, and then the other problem would be that let's just go with that there can't be a true infinite and there has to be a first cause. Go ahead and grant all of it, tentatively speaking. Okay, well, there's a problem because, okay, is God a mind? Okay, well, if God is just this mind, there's no other better way to put it. Well, how does it function? Because in a human mind, you have neurons that shoot off, and the neurons shoot off because chemical reactions, and the chemical reaction, and then you keep going in an infinite chain of cause and effect there. So if God has a mind and it's anything like our mind, then you still have an infinite chain. It's just an infinite chain contained within God's mind. So you haven't escaped the no true infinity thing at all. You know, it's like, well, before God thought about making the universe, what did God do? Well, there had to be an infinite amount of thoughts before that moment. And in fact, there are no moments because there's no time. So how does that work, and who knows? And so instead of actually answering the question at all, you've posed more questions. You've said, okay, this answer seems to fit the things that I'm observing. If I saw my door open right now, I could say, well, a ghost did it. Why? Well, because ghosts can open doors. Well, how do you know that? Well, because, in movies I've seen that ghosts can open doors. So it's something that ghosts can do. Well, that might be the explanation, but we're not even close to saying that could be, because I haven't demonstrated that ghosts are a thing, and also a thing that are able to open doors. So there's a lot of, just because I don't know the answer, that doesn't mean that the answer that could fit the scenario is the answer. Like if I went outside and there was I used to have a tree outside, but the next day I go out, there isn't a tree, but there's giant claw marks on the ground. Could I say, well, a dragon came and ripped out the tree because a dragon has claws and it's powerful enough to do that? Well, no. Even though that fits the story, it doesn't. Maybe a dragon did it, but I mean, that's kind of like, it's not even the last thing that I would consider. It's not even a consideration until I can find a dragon.
And then there's the other kind of interesting thought experiment. The question of, is there a deity? Well, what if there is, but he, she, it, they are not supernatural but natural, and they're just highly advanced beings, kind of like Q from Star Trek, and they, he, she, it, they made what we see now. That's equally as feasible,
right?
And whatever.
It would no longer be the biblical God, but it would, or that they orchestrated that to be happen. Right. Whatever. Then you have an infinite regress or whatever.
Ancient peoples saw this and said, "Oh, hey, well, let's write this down."
Yeah. Well.
And that was their interpretation of what happened.
Again, that's another explanation that fits the events, but it's not one that we can prove is.
There really isn't anything
it's
that we can prove is.
Well, but we can, but it's last Thursdayism.
Yeah.
Is basically what you get to. And by the way, last Thursdayism is the idea that the universe and everything we know, including the memories that we have, all came into being last Thursday. So you can't disprove that, but neither can you prove it. So because of that, there's no reason to believe that that's the way it really is. And so that's kind of where we're going with that. Now, like I said, my brother does believe in God. And we've had conversations about that, and I get really excited when I start to talk and think about it, because I get excited about the idea that we can somehow get to a point where logic and theology can almost touch. We get so close, but then it's like we just miss this little mark, and maybe it's just due to the way our brains are different or whatever. Because you believe in God, and how would you describe? I think you've done this before. How would you describe the belief of God that you have to, say, Flame Ministry? I know you've talked to him on email, but how would you describe what God is to you, if that makes sense? If that question's good.
Wow. That's kind of hard to answer.
It's a hard one to answer.
Well, I believe in God as a creator and father figure. Jesus is the Son of God kind of thing. The Holy Spirit is the part that helps keep you encouraged. But my particular brand of faith is more based on the idea of Jesus. You know, the loving your neighbor, treating people kindly, helping your enemies. That's the ideal that I want to strive for, and that's what I believe in. And it's just, I have certain problems with the Christian faith because there's too much dogmatism and sticking your head in the sand about reality, saying that the flood actually happened and the earth is only 6,000 years old and the earth is flat and whatever. Don't ignore reality. If you can have reality, have God at the same time, go for it. If you have to choose God or reality, choose reality. And now I'm in a weird place because I know the facts about biological evolution and the age of the earth and the age of the universe, and I accept those as being facts. And yet, I still believe, even against the overwhelming evidence, that the majority of what's written in the Bible is either highly inaccurate, patently false, or just unprovable. And the few things that are accurate to any point, a lot of those have been definitely blown out of proportion. But in spite of that, it's like, well, there's a lot of good ideas. And I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. Now, a lot of atheists have gone that direction, and hey, more power to
Right, I do.
But
there's no baby or bath water. I just threw
exactly.
it. Right.
Yeah, but I can still believe in the idea.
Yeah, that's I mean, we've gotten to this point before in our talks where, and this brings up Star Trek Next Generation episode with Worf. Man, what's the episode name with Kayla's? What is the episode's name? We don't know. I'll put it in the description below because I'll think of it later. But in the episode, Worf is having a crisis of faith and he's meditating. He sees Kahless, but Kahless is actually there. And it turns out, spoilers, Kahless is a clone and it's not really Kahless. And then the question for Worf is, well, did Kahless ever really exist or not? And the Kahless clone says, well, who cares? It doesn't matter if he did these things or not, or existed. What matters is what we believe. So it's like, even if it turns out to all be made up, the ethics and the morals that have been developed around this potentially fictional character, that's what matters.
And that's where I'm at.
And that's where you're at. And I think that's probably the... Well, no.
It's the only honest way.
I will say that's the best thing that I've heard. The second being maybe Jordan Peterson, but I've heard a lot more on what Jordan has to say on his particular faith and beliefs. So I've kind of gotten like, well, yeah, he really needs more exposure to some atheists. I get the feeling that he's kind of bubbled himself in a sense, but that's the only point of contention I have with him is that. But he never makes it like part of his courses or anything like that. He always strives to keep his faith separate from what he's doing. But at any rate, I mean, he'd be the second most honest theologian that I know of. Not because I think that, at the end of the day, it's like, well, we have to recognize that people's brains are going to be different, and that these belief systems that we've carried with us as humans throughout, well, since we've been since the start of even before humans, that some of our brains are going to be wired to have to believe these things. And some of our brains are going to be wired where they can switch it on or off, and some might be wired so they could never believe. Well, of course, and that fact would bring up additional theological questions perhaps as well. But it might just be that your brain is one where it's like, well, it can't let this concept go for whatever reason. Who knows? And maybe even doing that would maybe it's completely impossible, or maybe doing it would be irreparable damage. Who knows? And my statement's always been, it doesn't matter to me at the end of the day, because the journey is what matters, and the journey of being as honest as you can be and being willing as you've been to question what you hold most dear rather than rely on these really bad arguments is so much more honest, you know. So, you know, and then my viewers can slam me for not being an anti-theist, but you know, I'm not. So there's certain many ideologies that I'm completely against, you know, but
like not taking your kids to the doctor.
Yeah, things like, you know, or holding snakes or whatever. I mean, there's things that people do that are just plain nuts, you know, and there's certain things that religions have done and that people have done, and it's, you know, it's like, you know, what's their argument? That boils down to that. And when they don't have a good argument, rather than riding that bad horse, it's like, just stop, you know. Just go to the, I believe this, I can't prove it, and that would be honest, at least.
Yeah.
You know, because the argument, even if you had a solid one, wouldn't be a proof.
No, and I spent a lot of time looking for a logical argument for God. And at one point I was fairly convinced I had one. Unfortunately, I knocked my head against reality, and plus I tried to make an argument in a way that you can't make an argument.
I told you.
But at least
you tried, right? At least you tried to come up with something new and original,
so
right?
I kind of keep my ear to the ground and my eyes open, you know, looking for new ideas and thoughts on this. And if I can ever construct even a somewhat reasonable argument, I'll do it.
Right, but at least you recognize the fact that you can't use the ones that have already been dismantled millions.
Why should I come to the same ground everybody else?
That's what exasperates me about not just Grave to the Flame to pick on him or anything, but you know, across the time that I've been on YouTube and I've looked at all these different arguments, and it's like, you know that doesn't work, right? Like, you've been told many times in many ways why that doesn't work, but you're still going to use it again anyways, even though you know it's not going to work. So who is that argument really for? And it just seems like, you know, where the sham of apologetics becomes crystal clear. It's not for anyone except for the believers who choose not to understand actual logic for whatever reason. It sounds logical, looks logical, it smells logical, but it's not in reality. But it's good enough, and maybe it helps them, you know, avoid cognitive dissonance or something like that. Now I've heard the faith argument. It's just faith. I just believe in faith, and it's like, well, okay, and that's it. I can't. You know, you can ask questions, and you can go the that word I can't say. The sarcastic method, the Socratic method, and all that, and that's good, and we should, because, and the reason why, and I've said this before, the reason why we should question everything that we hold most dear, whatever it is, everything that we think, is if we don't do that, there is a consequence, both to the individual and the group as a whole. And it is, okay, so the person that's on the other side of my door wants to bust in my door and cause harm to me. And if I cannot reason with them, intellectually speaking, then my choice is to put them in a place where they cannot harm me or end their existence. And neither of those is good, for them at any rate. So, if that happens to be you, you might say, well, but my belief in God wouldn't land me in jail or get me killed. But you don't know that. Because it could.
It's happened before.
It's happened before. So, if there...
David Koresh, for instance.
Okay, I'm going to have to look that up.
The Branch Davidians.
Okay.
Waco, Texas.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, right.
They all ended up dead.
They ended up dead, right? Because they believed something that, well, maybe it was true. Maybe we all missed the boat, you know. But they didn't have a sufficient cause to end their life based on this belief. And I think that, especially with things like, you know, where you can make a religion into something where ending your life is a good idea, that's dangerous. And so if you're not willing to question that, then you've lost the ability to reason, and you know, there's the idea, of course, you know, that some theists have, the Christians at any rate, where the end times is not about Nero, which is totally about King Nero. Anyways, but they think that it's about, you know, a different God's going to come and test us all, and it's going to prove that it's God. So, you know, and it's weird because I guess that some Christians might believe that the atheists will fall for that. We won't, by the way. We won't think it's God. We'll be like, yeah, it's close enough, whatever. We won't worship you or think you're God. You could still be an alien. We don't know. Whatever. If you want us to call you God, I guess we will, because we don't have any connection or affection of the word God. You know, if that makes you feel better, fine, you're God, whatever. I'm not going to worship or follow you, though. But maybe that's enough. Calling it God's enough to do me anyways. But I'm supposed to come to the realization that that fake God is fake and that the real God is real. And here's the problem with that. Let's say that a different God that wasn't your God, wasn't Yahweh, turned out to be the real God. And so you're there before that God in whatever the eternal paradise thing is, but you have to pass the test before you go through the door, right? And so God's like, well, here I am, you know. It's like, well, you know, let's say it was Aslan from Narnia. That you're not a lion in the Christian Bible. Here's what it says. Like, no, that was all wrong. But you can just come in if you accept what I really am. Well, no, this has to be all a test. It has to be a test, because you can't really be the real God. So being unable to question your own idea screws you out of eternity because, you know, you were able to say, well, maybe you're the real God. I don't know. So, you know, there's a potential problem there. Not to appeal to fear too much or consequence, but I would see that as a potential bad thing that could happen. And it's been a while, so I think we're done. Yeah, I think that's good. We've annihilated why there doesn't have to be a first cause, I think, and we talked a little bit about other stuff. So if you enjoyed that, or if you didn't, leave your questions, comments, concerns, and other keywords in the comments section below. If you want to ask my theist brother, that was a weird pause. If you want to ask him questions, post those below and I'll deliver them to him, and he may or may not respond to those.
Unless and until you have a repeatable test, a logically coherent argument, or empirical evidence, I can continue to be skeptical of your argument.
What he said.